So we're recording now. So thank you both for joining us today. We're here to have a public information meeting on the Western Connecticut Affordable Housing Plan and the associated municipal annexes. I'm joined, well, first of all, I'm Kristen Floberg. I'm a planner at WestCOG. I'm joined by Charles Vidic, who's a senior project manager at WestCOG, and our executive director, Francis Pickering, is also on the line. So we all have our meeting today, but we also have one at the same time tomorrow, March 31st. And then April 1st, we will have a daytime meeting at 11 a.m. to 12. So to get started, let me press the next slide. Okay. So what is an affordable housing plan? So basically 5 years ago, in 2017, the Connecticut State Legislature passed PA Public Act 17-170, which requires municipalities to prepare and adopt an affordable housing plan for the municipality. And this should be done once every 5 years. And we are coming up on the first affordable housing plan, which is due June 1st, 2022. And the statute doesn't have a whole lot of specifics in there on what you should include in an affordable housing plan, but it does say that it should specify how they intend to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the municipality. And this is codified under Connecticut General Statutes 8-30J. Okay, so next, what is affordable housing? So generally, it's defined as housing that costs less than 30% of a household's income. And in Western Connecticut, there are 81,783 households, or 1/3 of all households in Western Connecticut that pay more than 30% of their household income on housing. And we also call this being cost burdened. So you're spending an exorbitant amount of money on your housing related costs. Housing related costs include your rent or mortgage payment, utilities, real estate taxes, fees, and other housing costs related to housing. To qualify as affordable under Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G, which has the definitions in it, is basically there's two different categories. The first is assisted housing, which are all housing units that receive financial assistance under any governmental program. This could be for your rental assistance program, or which you might know as Section 8 or the Connecticut Rental Assistance Program. But these can also be mortgage assistance programs through the USDA or the Connecticut Finance Housing Authority. And it could also be a loan to construct or rehab low or moderate income housing. The second type of affordable housing developments are called set-aside developments, otherwise known as deed restricting. This is one of the most common type of affordable housing that we've been discussing in all of our land use departments and things. These are what land developers come in and want to create this deed restricted housing. It's basically a development that has at least 30% of the units classified as deed restricted as affordable for at least 40 years. And in that deed restriction, it'll say it's only for tenants making 80% of the state or area median income. In the Western Connecticut region, this defaults to the state median income, as all of the municipalities in the region have higher area median incomes than the state. Under the same 8-30G statute, it also says that 10% of the housing stock to qualify as affordable to avoid the appeals procedure established in the state statutes. So what's included in the plan or plans? You can see here we have two separate ones on the screen. The first is the regional plan, or otherwise known as our resource document or toolbox, that municipalities can use to create their municipal annex or they can use it to make their own affordable housing plan that they then can adopt. The regional plan has several chapters, with some going over state and federal history related to affordable housing, a needs assessment, which reviews population, household, and housing stock characteristics. So this was done so we can have a comprehensive view of the region and see how each town compares to each other and as the region as a whole in our needs assessment. It also goes through the availability of land and infrastructure. And by infrastructure, we don't only mean your roads and your transit systems, but also sewer, water, how close you are to an employment center, your public services, etc. It also reviews municipal zoning and subdivision strategies, what our towns are currently doing, what other strategies, other areas of the state and country are doing to make housing more affordable. And last, it reviews different financing strategies that can help financing of an affordable housing development, or that or goes through rental assistance programs and their mortgage programs, so you can have some more details there. The second part of this whole process was we made a housing team in each municipality that is involved in this process. So we have 8 municipal annexes and 8 housing teams. And these are the policy-driven documents. This is what the town will adopt as their strategies for increasing affordable housing over the next 5 years. It also has some other details that we couldn't get into in the main regional report, such as town history relating to affordable housing, how they've increased affordable housing in the past, what they've done, what maybe doesn't work, or they've figured out doesn't work, and it's detailed there. This also hosts the community values statement and specific municipal housing data that wasn't as detailed in the report and provides a lot more in the municipal annex. Okay, so moving on, Charles is going to take over for this section.
So the question of why do we address housing at the regional level? The state did not require a regional affordable housing plan, and yet from a practical point of view, and you can go to the next slide, Kristen, housing is actually a regional issue. While it may be a local issue by law, if we look at really how housing exists, it exists within a regional context. For example, housing does not exist without employment, and employment does not exist without housing. And if we look at the commuting patterns of our region, most in every single town, including our urban municipalities, most of the people in each of our towns commutes to another town. That may be called the negative consequences of commuting, but it underscores the fact that housing is really a regional resource given the mobility of our society. And a positive consequence of it is that from a recreational point of view, or even a shopping point of view, very few people who just limit themselves to their municipal boundaries when they're looking for recreation, shopping, or other opportunities. So really, if you're looking at it from a systematic point of view and a comprehensive point of view, housing really should be looked at from a much broader perspective than any given town, because not all towns are equal, and we'll get to that in the next slide. You can go to the next slide, Kristen. What we have here are 5 enabling factors for multifamily housing, or for more dense development than a single family home. The 5 factors are important. First of all, there has to be availability of buildable land. All of our towns have buildable land lot requirements that exclude wetlands, floodplains, steep slopes, and shallow to bedrock, for example, and not all equally established in the same way, but the principle exists. And of course, one of the critical variables is water and sewer services. when we don't have water and sewer services, densities cannot be the same as you might find in a Stamford. You would not find that in a Bridgewater or a Sherman. And of course, behind it all is if there isn't multifamily zone land, obviously you can't have multifamily, but you don't put multifamily zoning in places where sewers actually exist. So there's an integrated analysis that must occur. And of course, other components which make for the multifamily housing to exist is mixed-use developments and other amenities which need to make it possible for people who live in areas where there's less use of the automobile. So that's why urban centers that have all the amenities, healthcare, transit, public services, are the ideal location because the infrastructure is already there. It doesn't have to be created de novo. And that's critical if you're an urban planner, and that's my background. The one thing that we want to avoid is the cost of sprawl. The classic study by Anthony Downs made it very clear that it's not in the interest of any community, region, or state, or the nation to be not using infrastructure to its best advantage. You can go to the next slide. When we talk about why look at things at a regional level, another reason we do look at it at a regional level is because housing markets are regional and influenced by the greater metropolitan area in which we're in. We're really a suburb, an outlying area of the city of New York, which has a very significant impact on the cost structure of our region. You can go to the next slide. Let's start with the national picture. You'll see 6 categories here. The actual National Association of Home Builders only had the 5 L's. I've included the 6th L called levies because levies includes marketing, sales commissions, profits, overhead, general expenses of the contractor. And of course, that is actually information from the National Association of Home Builders from a separate report. 5 L's sounds good. 6 is not quite as catchy. There's certain numerological systems that people think 5 is a good number. But in reality, levies is very significant. But the most, as you can see here, are labor and lumber that are almost 60% of the cost of a single family home at the national level. And I think it's important to see that laws, while they're important, are not the driver for the overall cost of housing. However, lots, and we'll get into that in a moment, represents almost 20%, 18% of the cost of a house. And in some regions of the country, it's a lot more. And we'll talk about that momentarily. You can go to the next slide. Thanks to the Commerce Record and the Warren Group that manages this, we get a report of it for every year of the actual median single-family house prices for our 18 municipalities. The thing to notice here is over the last 21 years, there was a 92% increase in the cost of a house in Connecticut. And if you look at the number between 2020 and 2021, there was a 10% increase in the state of Connecticut housing costs, largely, as you probably know, from the pandemic's impact on outmigration from New York and other metro areas. And of course, we did have a wide range of increases in cost over the last 21 years in our region. Some municipalities only increased by about 43%, as you can see in Reading, and 127% in the case of Darien. And some of those differences reflect not only the demand for housing, but the degree to which the community has already had a lot of development, and so the supply of land may not be as available for new or even for houses in period. So we have a wide range of changing costs across our 18 municipalities. You can go to the next slide. To the point mentioned earlier, that 18% of all the cost of a house in the national level is land. we did an analysis of every asking price for residential lots. Now, an asking price is not the selling price, but interestingly enough, in last year's market, the asking price could actually be a conservative estimate because many things were being bid up. So not everything is bid down in a highly competitive market. But as you can see at the regional level, the average asking price for a lot under 5 acres, which is considered to be what you'd use for a single family home, is almost $900,000. Ranging from about $100,000 up in Bethel, 118, to almost $4 million, a little over $4 million in Darien. So you can see housing costs are an important, one of the most important elements of a housing cost is the land cost that goes into it. You can go to the next slide, Kristen. Now, for those who want to get into the housing world and own a home, it's almost like I'd say buyer beware. When we buy a house, affordability is not just about buying the house, it's about also maintaining the house and all of the costs that go into home ownership. And as you can see, 6 of our municipalities had median monthly housing costs that were so high that they exceeded the census ability to get an accurate estimate of how high they were. And so the capture rate on the data was very limited, other than to say that it went well beyond the realm of all the other municipalities that we had. 6 of them were extremely high. And so anyone who is looking at affordable housing has to not think of just the land cost, the house cost, but the cost of living in a home over time is another variable in the equation of affordability. So you can go to the next slide. Let's talk about specifically the cost squeezes that exist, starting with the renters. Based on data from the census, what we have is basically 34,738 households that are renting that were cost squeezed, being, of course, as Kristen said, spending more than 30% or more of their income on housing. So that's a significant number of individuals, and it's something that obviously where the affordable housing plan was, the whole vision of the law was to look at how we can keep those costs down. You can go to the next slide. So now let's look at the mortgage holders, and they're the second category. And here you can see that it's a similar number, 36,683 mortgage holders that had costs that exceeded 30% or more. It's broken into categories, as you can see. Obviously, those who are paying on the far left less than 20% represent about 39% of the group. But really, if you add up the mortgage holders, it's roughly 27 and 7 is 34. So you've got kind of a V-shaped curve here where there's a lot of people who are not really too burdened. And then at the other extreme, there are some that are quite burdened. You can go to the next slide. This is a slightly different look at the same issue. This is looking at the supply of affordable housing. What's out there right now? Well, in this case, in the year 2019, the value of houses that were under $300,000 is a surrogate measure, at least for this presentation, of what affordability might be. And so we really had only about 20%, 19.8% of all owner-occupied housing units that were selling for $300,000. Remember, that was 2 years ago, and we do not have data from the census for the year 2020 or 2021 at this point. But it's an indicator that, part of it is the supply side and not just the income side that we're dealing with. And I think now I turn it over to you, Kristen.
Yes. So we're going to move on to the housing needs assessment portion. So Charles went over some of the data in terms of the market and how much people are paying for housing, but what does the whole kind of population demographics look like? What does our housing stock look like? And what do household compositions look like? So first off is just a population number for this for Western Connecticut. So in the last 50 years, the region has grown by 32%, and it's just over 600,000 as of 2020. It grew the most, well, not the most, but it grew a lot in the last decade. It grew about 5%. Compared to the state, which only grew 0.9% over the same period. So the region is seeing a significant amount of growth compared to the outlying areas. This also has a population projection out to 2050 of us gaining about 100,000 people in that time period. So for age distribution, I have 3 different charts here from 2000, 2010, and 2019, showing the different age classes here. The first 2 are the 2 younger classes. The dark blue are children. And you can see there's not too much of a change in that 20-year period. And same with the 20 to 34-year-olds. What I did want to point out were the next 2 age groups. This is one of the more dramatic shifts that we're seeing in Western Connecticut, is this flip-flop between the prime working age, 35 to 54 group where you're earning a lot of money and they're contributing a lot to the workforce, to now moving into the 55 to 74-year-old group, which are starting to retire. They might need some different needs in terms of housing, like a single floor possibly, so they can have more access to their home, smaller building. They might also need some more services and assistance. And these are some of the characteristics that we kept in mind while creating the plan. The next is household size and quantity in Western Connecticut, averaged. So first we have the all occupied units. We have about a quarter of people that are single person families. About a third are 2-person families. 17% are 3-person families, and another quarter are 4 or more person families. One of the major changes I wanted to display here was how that distribution splits when you have an owner-occupied unit or a renter-occupied unit household. The major differences are you're much more likely to be a single person at that in a renter-occupied unit, with 35% of all renters being single persons, and another 27% are 2-person families. You're much more likely to have a larger family if you're in an owner-occupied unit. And these are just some notes to keep in mind when we're talking about the different sizes of units. So moving on to the number of bedrooms per housing unit in Western Connecticut versus the state, going from no bedrooms up to 5 or more bedrooms. This is where Western Connecticut is much different than the rest of the state. We have a lot of much larger homes that might have some vacant area. If you remember the graph before, we have a lot of 1 or 2-person households that might not necessarily need 4 bedrooms or 5+ bedrooms. There's some opportunity for households to potentially share some of these larger housing units, or to create an accessory part of your building into an ADU or an in-law unit. The next graph shows the housing units by the number of units in your structure. About 59% of all of housing units in Western Connecticut are single-family detached homes, and the remaining 40% are multifamily types of structures, with the biggest being 20+ units. We're seeing this is where a lot of our buildings are how they're being built. And this graph was just to display that. So I wanted to show here that in Western Connecticut, this is showing the amount of housing constructed in the last decade from 2010 to 2020 by the number of units in the structure. So we've kind of shifted gears from the majority single family being built. Only 41% of housing constructed in the last decade were single family homes, while pretty much the remainder, 56%, are in these 5 or more unit buildings. So onto affordable housing trends. How much affordable housing do we actually have, and how much have we built in the last 2 decades? This is kind of the meat and potatoes of the affordable housing plan. So here you can see this is broken down by municipality and how much, what percentage they're at in terms of their total housing stock that is classified as affordable. As a region as a whole, we are just about at 9% if we were to take all these and combine it together. So very close to 10% there. And that equates to 2,538 units that would need to be constructed to get to 10% of all housing units being affordable. So Charles is going to take over for the next section.
Okay. Yes. Well, let's talk about what I call housing cost countermeasures. 2 of the variables on the left, zoning and support services, actually line up with the affordable housing requirements of Section 8-30G, where certain things have been set forth for municipalities to do with zoning, but also support services, if you'll notice at the bottom, are all about access to rental assistance programs and low-interest mortgage programs, which are really a significant part of achieving the affordable housing goals that the state has established. Whereas zoning can do it through deed restriction. But what this slide shows for both renters options and homeowner options is that some of these options vary by whether you're a homeowner or a renter. So if, in the case of access to rental assistance programs, obviously only renters are going to be getting that and not homeowners. However, when you get to the other program, the low interest mortgage programs, that is really a program only for homeowners or prospective homeowners. It's important to understand that some of the provisions that are in the law are directly looking to increase the numbers according to the affordable housing statistics that the Department of Housing keeps. But some things are enablers, and enablers are things that help to reduce the cost of housing, even if they don't actually create the so-called deed-restricted housing. Building tiny houses, working from home, operating a bed and breakfast from your home where towns allow it, or operating a accessory apartment. When you have an accessory apartment in your house and you're a senior person, you don't have a lot of money, it cuts your mortgage interest or your mortgage costs or your maintenance costs to have somebody who lives in your house. And as you saw from what Kristen said, we have enormous houses that are under occupied. And for the cases where we have 1 or 2 people living in a house for 6 or 7 bedrooms, one of the greatest housing opportunities this region has is to better utilize the single family homes that are there. And that is particularly valuable for elderly individuals who are not getting the same income stream that they had when they were in the workforce. So these are a variety of strategies. 2 of them, lifestyle and commuting, are examples of things that individuals can do that has nothing to do with a municipal responsibility, but are housing cost countermeasures. Now what I'd like to do is go into, if Kristen, you go to the next slide, the things that are exclusively in the municipal domain. At the top, you'll see a number of categories. Zoning Commission, number 1 column. Planning Commission, number 2. Housing Authorities is number 3. And then we go on with Engineering and Public Works, Water Pollution Control, Health Districts, Chief Elected Officials, and Transit Districts. Each of these departments of a municipality plays either a very primary role or a support role in dealing with issues that affect the affordability of housing. Now, zoning, obviously, in this case, on slide number 1 of this two-part series, plays an enormously important role in defining the types of densities, minimum lot sizes, and if you go down towards the bottom, almost the last 6 or 7 categories, including inclusionary zoning, incentive zoning, workforce zoning, senior housing, assisted living, and low and moderate income housing, as well as fee in lieu of low and moderate income housing programs. All of those categories I just mentioned are all driven by state policy. So it's not only that municipalities are developing these, but they're enabled by state policy. And so that becomes all the more important because the state is trying to establish certain standards or at least processes that may help in the development of affordable housing. As you can see, housing authorities also play a very important role, but not all of our housing authorities are playing the same roles in Western Connecticut, and some of our municipalities do not have housing authorities. So as you'll see in our regional plan, housing authorities are an opportunity waiting to happen. They can play a very significant role with certain housing types. Elderly housing is where some of the housing authorities have focused, but there's much more that housing authorities can be doing in our region. Let's go to the next slide. The other aspect here, this gets into some of the other roles. The Planning Commission, as you can see, has an influence over the cost of housing by the road standards, sidewalk standards, open space standards, fee in lieu of open space. These are examples of things that can affect the cost of housing. And there are a number of our municipalities who have looked at these issues. I'll take Norwalk as an example. That's actually done some very innovative work to maintain really good engineering standards while at the same time recognizing ways that some of the road and sidewalk standards can be modified to fit the density of certain types of development. It's a real opportunity. This is not a new idea. This goes back 40, 50 years in terms of performance standards and applying them to different levels of density. And I will point out land banking is one of the things that a number of our towns, some that are in the regional plan annex and some that are not, that are taking a much more of an interest in that opportunity, going back to earlier points about the cost of land. And if the cost of land can be controlled in some ways, and land banking is one of those strategies, then it's another way to get the cost of housing down. So I think that is a good overall summary, and I'll turn it over to you, Kristen, for the strategies.
Okay, so building off of what Charles said, those were kind of the start of the strategies. And I wanted to showcase some of the strategies that we've included in our toolbox, some of which Charles already mentioned before, which includes inclusionary zoning, workforce housing zones, your two-family, just making it overall more affordable by being able to build more units or to have an extra income stream. If you own a two-family home, you basically get a second person's rent to help pay for your mortgage. And then financing strategies, which were touched on briefly, but these are kind of your direct methods to have affordable housing. So your rental assistance programs, low-cost mortgage programs, which are utilized in a lot of the communities in the Western Connecticut region. And a lot of our municipalities want to make this even a bigger have more people have access to it and know about the program, that they can qualify for it. Deed restricted housing, public housing authorities, home ownership voucher programs, which are underutilized in our state, but are utilized in other areas of the country, which allows a person's rent to get put towards a down payment on a mortgage. So it's moving people from rental housing to a ownership type housing where they can build more wealth in the long term. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the regional plan, but I wanted to showcase the municipal annexes here. 8 of our municipalities have municipal annexes. The remainder either they already wrote their own municipal affordable housing plan or already received funding. So they were not, didn't make sense for them to also have an annex that they can adopt. But I would encourage everyone to take a look at your own municipality's annex. They're on our website at the web link down below, along with all the other information on how to join the meetings tomorrow and the following day, as well as accessing the regional plan. Okay, so we're going to move on to the questions part of today's session. And I just wanted to note a few things before opening up the floor to questions. The first is that the public comment period is open until April 20th. And you can send any comments other than today. We're happy to hear comments and questions, but you can also do it by mail to the WestCOG office or by email to plan@westcog.org. And this is just a link at the bottom to where you can find the regional plan and municipal annexes. Okay, so if you want to raise your hand, if you have any questions, we are happy to answer them. Or we can also take down any comments at this time that we can include in the plan. Okay, so I'm going to allow you to talk, Patricia. I'm going to press the button right now. You can go first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. There's a lot of information here, which is very good. My husband's here with me too, because the two of us just got on the Housing Authority in Brookfield, and we're dealing with the senior housing right now. But because of all the building that's going on in Brookfield, and obviously there's going to be a large influx of people coming into this area. We were wondering about things like schools. Are they going to be overburdened? Are the public services like fire and police and healthcare? I mean, all these things are going to be overburdened at some point in time, I think. I mean, how much affordable housing can we take on? Do you know? For, let's say, the Brookfield area? I don't know. We're brand new in this, so that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, that's a good question, and we receive it. It's one of the most frequent questions is how can a town support new housing developments and those services that go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing I did want to mention was to bring back the pie chart that showed renter households tend to be single or two-person families. So those typically aren't, they don't have children with them who need schooling, but they might also be older persons who need services too. Yeah, just
that's exactly what we're dealing with now. I mean, we just joined, so we're brand new on this, and the seniors are what we're dealing with and concerned about right now is the senior housing. Yeah.
They need help. Is it the availability of the senior housing that you're concerned with, that there's not enough, or there's too much?
It's not the availability of it. You can't fix what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, if we could fix what we have for the seniors.
Yeah.
Right? Think about the seniors now that are in my age and older, like 80 and 90. Because 90 is the new 75 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, what can be done? Where can they go to get things fixed?
You mean the seniors?
Yeah, the
I mean,
senior
seniors,
housing,
yeah.
the senior housing
They
was
need
built.
septic systems. They need septic. They need a lot of work in the Brooks Quarry at this time. Where do you go to get, well, who do you speak to get some more movement?
You're saying that the septic system, is it a failing septic system?
I don't know if it's failing or not, but it's not adequate.
I see. And this is for the senior housing that exists right now.
Yes.
Correct. And now if you're bringing new housing in,
Yeah.
Overburden it
it's
even
going to
more.
overburden even more.
Yes. I think you've hit a very important point. One of the things that we've been looking at is that whenever housing is put in areas where there are no sewers and water, there should really think not only twice, but thrice before doing anything, because community leaching fields are sometimes put forward as a solution for having higher density in rural areas, but it is really a recipe for disaster. I've had a lot of experience managing large-scale community leaching systems in my previous work, and unless the proper engineering support is given to the maintenance of these systems, they can be very problematic. And that is one of the things, a number of our municipalities have come to that realization that we have to live within the limitations of the soils that we have in rural areas, because we can't just willy-nilly put in a system and assume that abracadabra it's going to work. These are very sophisticated systems that require a lot of engineering and a lot of maintenance to keep them functional. So that's one of the things that any of our rural municipalities need to be very mindful of. And I think you've raised a very important point here. A number of our municipalities have come to this realization the hard way by having experiences like you're talking about. And I'm hopeful that a number of those so-called learning experiences will lead to some better understanding and some growth.
These buildings were built in the 80s, in the early 80s. So
Yes.
you can see what's happening now. And we're just new into this, and we're just took one walkthrough, and there seems to be that it's in need of help.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you know, you've hit at a very important point. In fact, we've had extensive discussions about this issue. In fact, we've written a number of papers about this issue. And this is one of the things that, while we all know affordable housing is needed, it also has to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, within a regional context. Some places are better for affordable housing than others because of infrastructure. And in other cases, you know, let's say in Bridgewater, one of the most valuable tools available is the U.S. Department of Agriculture low interest or zero interest mortgage programs, which allows people to live in a single family home, you know, with a septic system, as opposed to, you know, where you're developing multi-family dense development in areas where it can't be sustained. So the mortgage assistance programs actually turns out to be one of the greatest opportunities for our rural municipalities that fall within the U.S. Department of Agriculture zone. In fact, Bridgewater is in that area, so it's one of the great programs. And what we've emphasized is what we need is more communication, you know, within the community, within the real estate world, within, you know, prospective home buyers, about the value of that program, because you're not necessarily creating any new housing, you're just making it easier for someone to get a mortgage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
If I may, Francis Pickering here from WestCOG. We can't speak to a specific project, but is the housing you're looking at a public housing complex, or is it homes that are owned by individuals?
No, it's not homes. They're 800. The largest is an 800 square foot unit,
Mhm.
And they're attached.
and they're attached, and there's like, what, 4 buildings, 3 or 4
No,
buildings?
there's 6 buildings
6
with either
buildings.
3 or 4
You-
units in each building.
All right, and it's, the smallest is 600 square feet, and the largest is 800 square feet.
Yeah, they're small.
They're very small, and
Right.
It's a
Yeah, and
single
so-
person.
Yeah, this is what Charlie was getting at, is that the housing must really be built for the infrastructure. And if the infrastructure is not there, then it could be a very expensive
These were built
retrofit.
in the 80s.
Yeah, it could be a
So-
very expensive retrofit to connect the infrastructure, replace it so that it's sustainable. So, and Charlie mentioned it before, or as did Kristen, that the affordability of housing is not just the purchase price, it's also the maintenance
Mhm.
cost over time. Some costs are monthly, some, as you know, are large capital expenses that may only materialize 30 or 40 years into the future.
That's
So
exactly-
when we're looking at building new affordable housing or converting existing units into new affordable units, we really need to, although state law does not call for this, state law does not include maintenance costs. There does need to be a maintenance plan for multifamily affordable housing, because
They have it seems to be a good maintenance plan. It's the major infrastructure.
Yeah,
That's
Right,
the major
that-
infrastructure.
that-
They need a new generator. That's
one of the things.
yeah, so that
I mean, the
has to be
generator
built-
is ancient. You got to kick it to start it, you know?
Those
Almost.
costs do need to be
Almost.
incorporated into a long-term plan. And if they weren't, that's unfortunately an error of the past, and we're playing catch up. Now, I don't know if this applies to you. This plan we're talking about here, our Regional Affordable Housing Plan, addresses Connecticut General Statutes 8-30G, which establishes certain types of housing that qualify as affordable under state law.
Mm.
And this complex, I don't know it personally, I don't know if it qualifies, but in the situation where housing exists, where there are large maintenance needs, and it doesn't currently qualify as affordable, there is an option for a municipality to provide rehabilitation loans of at least $25,000 for each unit. Now, that comes at municipal expense, but if those units don't currently qualify under 830G, provision of these loans, if they're conditioned on income restriction or income qualification, would make those units qualify for 8-30G. So I don't know if these already qualify as affordable housing, but if they don't, there may be an incentive for, I think it's Brookfield or your housing authority, to look at this and say, this is a way we can get more. Okay, Greg just commented they are 8-30G, so this would not actually help you in that situation. But your points are very well taken. They raise an issue that is definitely not unique to you.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Greg, did you have anything else to add? I allowed you to come into the room too.
Yeah, hi, thank you.
It's great. Great.
Oh, we can't hear you, Greg. I think you're a little far from your microphone if you're.
He might
Oh,
be.
is that any better?
Yep, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, to the Bancios, I want to thank you both for joining the Brookfield Housing Authority. I've actually been in conversation with First Select Sarah Carr and Ellen Melville, who's our social service director for the town, joining and the region joining on a plan for us to have more public
I can
housing.
understand it.
I talked to the previous board members on the Housing Authority, Howard Lasser and Michael Steele, and I know they're frustrated with a lot of things about the Housing Authority. A lot needs to be done. So I encourage you to reach out to Sarah or Ellen Melville or myself and read the Brookfield Housing Authority annex plan that was referenced during this presentation, to get some background that we want to do as far as a town and what our action plan is. That's just a general comment back to the Bacio. Kristen, a question for you and maybe to Francis. Is there any discussion or possible legislation or dialogue going on at all at the state level about changing 830
Changing
to
what?
get some credit for things like incentive housing or other more affordable housing? It's not quite 830Gs. Any more legislation coming that's going to make this more achievable
Yeah, I think we're here. I think we've heard your question, Greg. Thank you for it. About are there any legislative proposals or actions to amend 830G to perhaps more comprehensively capture the extent of affordability in municipalities' housing stock? And for those of you who don't know, 8-30G does set a 10% threshold for the amount of housing municipality that must qualify as affordable in order for municipal zoning not to be subject to judicial recourse and override by a developer. This is a perennial issue. It comes up every year before the General Assembly. There are very strong sentiments on both sides. The affordable housing advocates, in my view, tend to resist any efforts to capture more affordable housing under 8-30G, even naturally occurring affordable housing, so housing that isn't deed restricted or public housing, because they want to see more housing built to address the challenges we face. The other side on this debate believes that all housing that's affordable, regardless of what type, should be reflected. And there are good arguments on both sides. Right now, I'm not aware of any legislation that's being discussed to amend 830G. WestCOG is in discussion with our legislators about some potential legislative incentives for municipalities to do certain things in exchange for so-called naturally occurring affordable housing to be counted towards 830G. We're looking at a model that's used in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but right now this is discussions only. There's no concept in the legislature. There's no bill before the legislature. So I don't foresee any action occurring this year, but these discussions are ongoing, and I don't expect them to cease with the close of the session in May. Perhaps next year we'll see something.
Thank you.
And then it was a little choppy before, so I just wanted to reiterate what I think Greg said was he was pointing Patricia and your husband, I didn't catch his name, towards the Brookfield Annex Municipal Affordable Housing Plan. And you can find that on our website, and there's some discussion of the Brooks Quarry in there as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You are welcome. Okay. Any other questions before we conclude the meeting today? Okay, so I think we will sign off for the night. If you have anything else or you want to comment on the plan, you can find it on our website, and then you can email us at plan@westcog.org, or you can send it by mail to our WestCOG office with the addresses right here. So thank you both for joining tonight, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Kristen, Patricia, and Greg.